So the gameplay that you are seeing on screen is a challenge I set for myself where I cannot shoot an enemy unless they are suspended. The only thing I can do to grounded enemies is either suspend them, throw out my strand melee ability, or throw a tangle at them, but shooting my guns is not allowed unless the enemy is suspended. And the reason that I did this is just to prove a point that this Strand Hunter build has a 100% uptime of suspension capabilities, making it very potent for higher level content. And with that in mind, let's go ahead and cut to the intro. Hello everybody, Maven here. Welcome back to part 3 of a 3-part series where we do strand builds for all 3 characters. In the first episode we did Titan, in the second episode we did Warlock, so if you want to check those builds out, I'll link them in the card up above, I'll link them down below in the description and in the pinned comment, and today we are finishing off with the Hunter, so let's get to it. Hope you enjoy. So today's build is based around the Sixth Coyote Exotic chest piece. It just simply gives you a second dodge charge. And you know, with your aspect that gives you that air ability where you can slam down on the ground and suspend enemies with an area of effect that you're seeing in the background gameplay, that consumes your dodge charge. So with the Sixth Coyote giving you a second dodge, you have more suspension capabilities out of that aspect. So that is pretty much the main idea of this build and what it is heavily based around. But this build is also heavily based around our other aspect, you know, the one that gives us a second grenade charge. And a lot of players associate that with the grapple ability because it has another piece of text that says your grapple creates a grapple tangle at the grapple point. So a lot of people just want to run grapple and be hoppy hunters flying through the air. But when I see this aspect, I think of something else. I think, what if I could have 2 shackle grenades and just suspend everything? So that is where this build came to mind, and it's also heavily based around being able to spam those 2 shackle grenades as much as we possibly can. And the way that this build is able to work is through our mod setup, our fragments, and our weapon choices. So let's talk about it. And while suspension is the main focus of this build, it is not entirely what it's based around because it is also heavily based around armor charge, making orbs of power and picking them up because there's a way that we're going to utilize them. So this season we have an active artifact mod called Volatile Flow. When you pick up an orb of power, you get granted volatile rounds. So that is why with this build we are using 2 void weapons. And through the Void Siphon mod on your helmet, you're able to create an orb of power just by simply getting a double kill. So we're trying to get a 100% uptime of volatile rounds as well, just like the Gear Falcon's Hauberg Void Hunter build does. Although I will say, if you're planning on using this build in lower level content, I would highly recommend using a copy of Firepower and Heavy Handed on your gloves, because it'll make an orb of power as well when you get a powered melee final blow or a grenade final blow, and that's easier to achieve in lower level content. However, I'm using this build more in difficult content, so it's harder to achieve that. So onto our mod setup here, we have 3 copies of Charged Up on our chest piece, so we can carry up to 6 armor charge stacks. And then on top of that, we are running stacks on our boots. So we pick up an orb of power, we get 2 stacks of armor charge instead of 1. Now, the way that we are expending all 6 of these stacks of armor charge is via Void Weapon Surge on our boots. Since we are running 2 Void Weapons, we could take advantage of this. Now, it's sort of like Phantom Might, albeit a little bit nerfed. Instead of a 25% damage buff, it is only a 10% damage buff. However, it does last a very long time. So when you have the Void Weapon Surge mod on, your armor charge stacks will decay over time. Each stack of armor charge is going to decay in 10 seconds. So when you have the 6 stacks of armor charge, that's 60 seconds of a 10% damage buff to your void weapons, but 10% damage on top of having volatile rounds from picking up those orbs, you're going to be slaying out super hard, getting those void weapon double kills and non-stop generating more orbs. And you go pick up those orbs, you get 2 stacks of armor charge, that's 20 seconds of a 10% damage buff. This build is just a constant uptime of volatile rounds and a 10% void damage buff. So it does some pretty hefty damage. Now let's take a look at the rest of our mods here. I also have Stasis Siphon because I'm using the Riptide. I have Heavy Ammo Finder just because I had some energy to do so. Now here is where we're able to get all of our abilities back. So starting off with Absolution, when we pick up an Orb of Power, we get some reduced ability cooldown for all 3 of our abilities. And then onto our class item, when we use our dodge, it's gonna proc Bomber and Outreach. 2 copies of Bomber, 1 copy of Outreach. So we get some reduced melee cooldown and grenade cooldown. Now here's where the real magic happens on our gloves. Impact Induction. So here's where everything ties into each other. Causing damage with a melee reduces your grenade cooldown, but momentum transfer, causing damage with a grenade reduces your melee cooldown, so they feed into each other. And then when we cause damage with a grenade, we get some class ability energy. The class ability is what's going to proc Bomber and Outreach on our class item, so everything chains with each other and loops. And this is how we're able to spam abilities constantly. But it doesn't stop there, and it gets even crazier when we talk about our fragments. So Threat of Generation, simply just dealing damage in general, generates grenade energy, which is pretty wild. I wish every subclass had this. And then we have Threat of Fury, throwing a tangle at an enemy will generate melee energy, and it's a pretty significant amount, enough to warrant using this. And we're generating tangles via Threaded Spike because it severs enemies, and defeating a severed enemy will generate a tangle. And not only that, severing an enemy will also debuff their damage output, making you tankier. And then on top of that, we even have Threat of Mind, so defeating suspended targets generates class ability energy, so even more ways for everything to just feed into each other. And just for some icing on the cake, we got Thread of Warding. Since we're making Orbs of Power constantly, picking them up is going to grant Woven Mail. Now, I heard that it is a 60% damage resistance buff, and it lasts 10 seconds. If that's true, that's insane, and it's making us really tanky, because I was doing some high-level content, and I was surviving pretty well, even though I only have tier 1 resilience and no resist mods. Now, I would say this build is mainly a grenade spam build above everything else, because the grenade feeds into our other abilities in so many different ways. That is where our weapon choices come into play. We are running triple demolitionist weapons, so no matter what we do, no matter what we get a kill with, we are making grenade energy, so we can keep that constant uptime of suspension grenades. Now, the way that the Demolitionist perk works is that normally on final blows, it grants plus 10% grenade energy, and that's how it works for primary weapons and heavy weapons. However, for special weapons specifically, not counting tracer rifles, doesn't work for tracer rifles, but for every other kind of special weapon, final blows will grant 20% grenade energy. That is a pretty solid amount. So that's why we have a shotgun and a fusion rifle here for some heavy damage, on top of having the corrective measure time loss, which is the best grenade spam heavy in the game. Demolitionist Adrenaline Junkie is a nasty roll, and machine guns just got a big buff this season to their inventory size, and also a 10% damage buff. And also note that both of my special weapons here have the same roll, Lead from Gold Demolitionist. That makes it so when we pick up a heavy brick, we get granted some special ammo. And that's pretty good, because remember, on our helmet we're running heavy ammo finder, and that's all we really need, because when we get more heavy bricks, it's also giving us special. And also remember, the game that Destiny 2 is coded is that when you're running double specials and you get special weapon final blows, it has a higher chance to create heavy ammo, and vice versa. You get heavy kills, it's more likely to spawn special ammo. So running double special is the way to go nowadays. There's really no reason not to. And also, by the way, the Deicide shotgun is now back in the loot pool, because previously, if you wanted a Lead from Gold Demolitionist Void shotgun, you would have to farm the Retold Tale from the Dreaming City. But anyways, I'll also go over some backup weapon options that you can run with this build. There is a Null Composure, which is a rapid fire frame Void Fusion with Reservoir Burst, so I can take pretty good advantage of those volatile rounds. The Deafening Whisper is also pretty solid here. It's got auto-loading holster, and of course, Lead from Gold. Very good for just spamming it whenever you have the chance. And then Telesto just hits like a truck. It's a very good option if you wanted to run an exotic. And now for some Riptide replacements. If you do not have the Lead from Gold Demolitionist roll, there is also Auto-Loading Holster Demolitionist and Field Prep Demolitionist. All three of these rolls are very solid. I would not argue with either one. And then if you just need a solid source of reliable damage against a bigger target, the Wither Horde, you can never go wrong. If you're doing a run and gun sort of boss, you need some burst damage, there's Izanagi's Burden. And then Full Runner is very good as well. These two precision weapons, since they do heavy precision damage, they are very good of taking advantage of suspended targets who cannot fight back, and they're staying completely still. So good DPS in these. And by the way, if you wanted to see a bunch of different weapons tested against suspended enemies to see how you can best take advantage of the fact that the enemies are staying still and not fighting back, I would highly recommend checking out my Strand Titan build video that I'll link in the card up above. I'll link in the description and in the pinned comment. And in that video, I go more in depth about what you can do to abuse suspended targets. So with this build, I would invest into 100-100 in discipline and mobility, and then try to get as much as you can in strength strength, of course with a minimum of at least 3 intellect. So that about wraps up the full build breakdown for the Sixth Coyote Strand Hunter build. As always, I will leave a dim loadout link to this build down below in the description and the pinned comment if you would like to give it a try. So final words for this build, I would say it is very viable for difficult content because you can just suspend everything in your way so they cannot fight back at you or your teammates. But I also will say be very careful shatter diving into the battlefield if you do not have woven mail, because you only have tier 1 resilience and no resist mods, so you're pretty squishy at the base level. So I would say prioritize making that orb of power, getting a clear line of sight on where that orb of power dropped, and strategizing to go out there and grab it, and then proceed to suspend everything in your way and do the darn thing. Because once you pick up that orb of power, it's on. You got that constant void weapon surge, you got that constant volatile rounds, and you are ready to slay out. And remember that if you're going to fight a tankier boss, feel free to just slap on the Wither Horde and also swap out your corrective measure for something like a Taipan, and you're good to go. And thus concludes the saga of the 3-part series of Strand builds here. We did Titan the other day, we did Warlock yesterday, we did Hunter today. So in the near future, I'm going to make a follow-up video concluding what I feel about all 3 Strand characters and determining which one I feel is the strongest Strand character for the potential of the game in the future. And with that being said, I'd love to see you subscribe. Would love to have you here. We have a lot of spicy builds coming on the way with all of the new mod systems and all the new reworks. I'm very excited to pump out a lot of crazy builds here in the near future. And if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you hit the like button and drop a comment, because interacting with the video in those kinds of ways really helps the algorithm and helps the video out. And with that, I will catch you in the next one. Later.